As this arc has really started to get underway, we've had a lot of just very clear pathways of strength increasing across the main cast. And I think some of them it's funny enough harder to see in specifics with like Wendy right now because Wendy has her whole enchanting thing going on, but we don't have Irene anymore, but she still is progressing and gaining higher skill. Whereas like Lucy got Mercphobia's key, she still has other Stardust mixes in order to use. Urza's getting pushed by Wed literally every time they run into each other. Gray just got his cool uh, black glistening ice and being able to just invent ice techniques whenever he feels like. And with Natsu, I mean, technically he could already make ice techniques with whatever he thinks of with Maker Magic, but it's completely different now. He can like actually add attributes and aspects to them. With Natsu though, we've known that where Natsu's pathway has been since the start of 100 Years Quest. That's the one big difference between him and the other characters is he had this already preset because we already know for his dragon slaying side of things, but because of his Etheria side that we've learned more about as the Alvarez arc went underway, we now know that it's still present within him. We don't know like full in like all out degree, but I can't take anybody really that like gets this far and they see like this panel like of Natsu and it's just like it has that same shading around the eyes, the same way he talks. It's his Etheria side, like it's very obvious. And the form that he used against Mercphobia, I've just called it Ethereus Dragon Force for years because it's the easiest by default one. I've known that people have called it Purgatory Dragon Force, which is really cool. The only reason I haven't is like gone with any different names is just because it's semantics of namings of something that we don't actually have the officials of. And as somebody who has been on the series since long before we had like official names, and some of those names just stick in your head, like Visitor's name, and like it was like four different names. At one point, he was just Visitor, and it's like stuff like that. Will just lock in and just never get out of my brain without the most amount of effort. So it's just like I'll use a placeholder easy name, Ethereus Dragon Force, for now. But the reason I'm going to bring up like the fact that people call it Purgatory Dragon Force is the fact there is some credibility to it in what we've seen in 100 Years Quest. Like the first, hard to think if Natsu had any other new techniques. I'm pretty sure this was the first new technique that he got within 100 Years Quest was when he used against Mad Mole was Fire Dragon King Purgatory. And this was when Natsu first started to really focus on internal temperature for both him and like his targets when he's hitting someone. And we saw at the very start as well of 100 Years Quest when he tried to ignite his flame underwater, it didn't go off because like the problem is more so is not Natsu can't get rid of water. It's more so he doesn't. Natsu's not the most educated guy. I always say like Natsu isn't like stupid, but he's just not educated. He's less like Goku and Luffy, and I'd say more kind of like Denji, where it's not you put him in a normal scenario, it's not like he would be some scholar, but it's very clear that like where he's at is more because he just like he grew up really uneducated. He grew up in the woods essentially. He died at one point, came back, hung out with some dragons who taught him dragon that taught him some language. Disappeared. He's off doing whatever, just looking for him. Macro finds him in the woods, is brought to the guild. Natsu is not somebody that clearly went through any form of formal levels of education. And I think just because of that, he's not the smartest main character, obviously. But as it were, you look at where he's at, in his problems is he started out having issues with like, oh, what do I need to do about my fire specifically? He's not just throwing fire as we saw like stuff with like Mad Mole and stuff with like Alderon's wood sword. It's weird, it's like he didn't have any wood attacks that actually resembled a sword, Forest of Swords, tons of spikes. But those as well, like Natsu had trouble burning them at first, and he realized like just keep turning up the temperature, amping and rising the temperature, and that leading into when he went and defeated Alderon with Purgatory slashing Dragonfire, which is his strongest known named attack currently. And again, I think this is important because the first named attack we got, Purgatory in it, first new big attack, and really like his strongest known current attack, Purgatory is in it. And let me pull up the panels really fast, just for the sake of bringing them up. So you have this one. We use Purgatory slashing Dragonfire of Alderon. You can actually see a good level of representation in this attack from just the visuals. Because like when Natsu's fist is going through, that heat wave that was just around his fist seems to really just add that extra layer of just impact and an effect onto the pathway of it. And then the fact that when he hits the guy, he's not directly hitting him, and then fire is exploding out of Natsu's fist. It's like fire is exploding out the back of him. So that's just all heat that is leaving the body as he, is going about this attack. And I think that's just really badass in general. But again, when you combine that with, again, knowing with his Purgatory, let me see really fast. Fire Dragon King's Purgatory, he's just doing internal burning, but he's also doing burning on the outside. So it's just it's a much higher end version when we saw the secret art version of it. But the reason I think that's really interesting is the naming of it, the whole Purgatory naming. Because once we got before it's like cool naming, it's just, oh yeah, this is just a badass naming sequence that he's got going on. But I think when you really think about it, when you look at, okay, this was the first new attack Natsu put in, and then the first new secret art and his strongest current attack. And then once we got to the stuff with Misfortune and Bestia, she uses the wording specifically, the power to make a prison of flames, a prison of flames that will burn everything up. And I think that's important just for how Purgatory is. Let me get the exact definition of Purgatory. Just for the sake of it, because I know obviously like Purgatory is a type of like spiritual prison standing, a place of state of suffering inhabited by the souls of sinners, which again I think has a lot to do with the whole backstory of E&D and Zareth and whatnot. But this whole idea of it being this place of confinement, this like essentially like a locked place of suffrage. And you combine that with, again, the prison of flames, as he says, and it makes me wonder how much of that is just, build up into what we're going to be really seeing from Natsu. Man, my screen is so bright because I have these two white windows pulled up. Let me decolor it a little bit. But when I look at stuff like that, I think it actually adds, look how much better it is when I don't have two white screens. But you look at, again, like the messaging of it. Is if Natsu is he supposed to become, as people call him, a purgatory dragon? Is that going to now, is that something that was hinted at with these other names? Is it going to lead into that? Because I think it would align very well with a lot of the specific theming of things that are adjacent to Natsu. You look at Acnologia. Acnologia is another extremely powerful dragon slayer that became a dragon. And Natsu's had a lot of small parallels to him, just lots of specific things in their story that led them to where they're. Obviously, you can look at I did some videos on it years ago. I did do an updated one. You can look at stuff like Natsu's teachings from Igneal, or stuff that he holds like as like concrete to his life. Whereas that's how the Doctor was when he was betrayed by the dragon Acnologia, and then later took on the name Acnologia. Whereas like Natsu still holds the name Dragneal, but Dragneal is I was gonna go into plot reasons for it. So it's like Dragneal is his family name, but Dragneal is also, it's like slightly wording away from Igneal. But Natsu didn't know that like his whole life. He didn't know that Dragneal was like actually went back to his original family. So it's like, does he think it has to do with it? I'm getting into the iceberg of the most not important thing probably in this conversation. But as I was like, technically I'm right and wrong on that, because it depends on how you look at the wording. Like, I'm wrong in the large sense, but from Natsu's perspective is where I'm looking at it. It's like, what does he look at it specifically? Because I assume barely words off, he probably thinks that that's where his name came from. But because it's like it's like one of those things that's like, technically is Urza Belsarion, but she's still Urza Scarlet. I don't know. There's like weird stuff when it comes to characters' last names and aspects of them where it's like, well, how do they know? How does Wendy know our last name's Marvel? But as it were, if this is supposed to be, signs and tellings for the full strength of what Natsu's going to be, is that going to be like, again, an official change? Is he a fire dragon slayer in base, but when he goes into this later form that we saw before, but now it's an official name, is he a purgatory dragon slayer? Is that going to add on to what he's already got and to what he's going to be able to really dish out for his for his fights and like his general presence as a dragon slayer, because I would imagine if he becomes some form of like official, either new or rare or whatever the case is, like a variant of a fire dragon, I would assume that he's going to be able to gain more stuff on top of that, just because we know that each species of dragon has their own specific perks, and it doesn't seem like every fire dragon is exactly the same, but differences of fire dragons. Because you had stuff like Atlas Flame as like a Hellfire dragon, and he has this whole fire intangibility where his body is made of flames. So it's like stuff like that, and then seemingly it's like he dies and he can become this eternal flame that burns for centuries. So it's like if Natsu could do, is he going to be able to do something like that where it's like, okay, he combines the concept of that, and maybe he can like hit someone with fire, and even after it hits them, it still just does this continuous burn that can't be put out normally, kind of like scenario. Like he just has like these extra fire buffs. I don't know. It's really intriguing to me because it stopped being I think with this panel, it stopped being a naming convention where it's just, oh yeah, cool names, and it starts to be like, is this foreshadowing? Is this something I need to be paying more attention to, or is this just, oh yeah, fun coincidence? I personally think that it has a lot of specifics into this character, because then I luckily I brought back to this, I got sidetracked talking about Acnologia. Acnologia has all these themes on like the apocalypse, and his design has this very almost angelic knight feel to him, with like the cool scaled like his wings are clearly feathery in theming, but obviously they're dragons. Dragon wings are scaled. And then his face, really, when you think about it, like he doesn't have pupils like other dragons, so it looks almost like he's wearing armor, like a helmet. And I've always looked at Acnologia in that style. It's like he's supposed to be almost like this archangel, like fallen archangel of the apocalypse, which would make a lot of sense for his story, that he was this better person, a doctor that wanted to heal and help people, but then he just kept falling down this depression rabbit hole, and of hostility, depression and sad, not depression really. I guess really it was just shock and anguish that turned into rage and bloodlust. And when you look at like Tartaros, obviously Tartaros's theming of just literally its name is a big maze prison in Hades, right? I have to double check and look into my Greek lore, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. There was no Minotaur, surprisingly or not. But either way, I would love to hear what other people have to say about this. It's like, do you think that this is just foreshadowing? Do you think this is going to be something up and coming for Natsu? Because once we get to Bestia, I imagine we're going to be getting some hints as to like where it's going to lead for Natsu. I think Natsu is going to have to at some point gain control of his Aetherius form and gain control of that power. And it's only through him gaining access and control of his full capabilities that he's going to be able to really beat Ignia. And I just don't really see it happening as it is at the moment. Because even if Natsu just kept pushing his Fire Dragon abilities, Igni is a fire dragon, and he's the strongest fire dragon relatively the history of fairy tale has ever known. I mean, and unless we're gonna find out about some ancient super dragons back in the day, Ignia should be the strongest fire dragon, because prior to him, it would have been Igneal, and I think it's very safe to assume that Ignia is stronger than Igneal at the moment, unless we find out Prime Igneal. When maybe Igneal, I talked about this before, maybe Igneal that we knew was already really old, and he already lost a lot of his power during all the stuff prepping for the Dragon Slayers and stuff in the fight with Acnologia. But what if it was like, oh yeah, centuries before? Maybe Igneal is 800 and he was in his prime at 300 or 500 or something, and then we only saw him in his decline. I don't know. Either way, it's safe to assume that Natsu is going to really need to delve into this power that he has, but he's never really tried to harness himself and really tried to get a hold of. And I think that's just because he's like, yeah, this is a little bit worrisome. Losing your control and consciousness during a fight, and then just coming to, and it's like you tried to murder somebody, and then Lucy's just burnt up trying to keep Natsu from doing it. You hurt Lucy in the process. Probably not his best day. But anyway, other than that, comment below. Tell me your thoughts are about this idea. Tell me your thoughts are if, like, do you think this is a logical next step for Natsu? Do you think this is where he's going to go? Once we find out a little about Bestia, I want to just talk about, like, what this could mean for Natsu. Because I don't think whatever she does, it's going to be a one-for-one. But I think whatever she does, it's going to be, like, some form of catalyst going into what Natsu's doing. Like, if she has some darker flames that do X, Y, or Z, then I would imagine in some way that's going to transfer over to Natsu, but not directly. Like it might go into his flames in some way, shape, or form. You know, take on like a new color or something. You know, maybe that darker red that we saw in the anime once he fought Mercphobia. Because there is the fact that the anime changed it a little bit, and this is something actually I'll end with. In the manga, Natsu's form, he's got normal Dragon Force scales. I would assume they're red. Maybe they're flesh colored. I'm pretty sure they should be red, just because the cover shows them as red, and that's going to be the most logical. But obviously, it changes a little bit in the anime. But with Natsu's scales, where the that dark again ethereous layer is over it, the scales, instead of being red or in flesh colored, are like a dark black red color. And I think that the anime did that intentionally. Like, it changed Ignia's design to the one that we saw later, that, you know, the Dogra Labyrinth, the one he uses now. So I would imagine that that was intentional. I imagine that, what, you know, the whole bit of giving Natsu these darker scales was intentional. And instead of it being where he's got Dragon Force with that Ethereus bit layered on top of it, it seems like those powers are fused in that state, in the anime at least. But anyway, other than that, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say on all this, and I'll talk to you guys on the next one. Bye.